Serious? What the most disturbing or creepy thing that you've ever witnessed in real life? My dad died of cirrhosis of the liver. It's not a pretty way to go. The worst part about it is that when the liver stops working the way it should, it causes a buildup of ammonia in the blood that can severely affect the brain. My dad was a former Marine and was always a very level-headed guy, so when his mind started to go, it was terrifying. I can remember one day him and I were alone and he suddenly started talking in gibberish. He stood up, walked to the middle of the room and started peeing his pants. I asked him what he was doing and he said, "What are you doing in the bathroom?" "I'm trying to go pee." "Get out." We were in the living room. A minute later, he collapsed on the floor and I had to call 911. It might not sound creepy to some, but seeing your parent like that is awful. I had an uncle die of liver cancer. I saw a picture of him my dad took when they visited the day before his death, and I will never forget the color of his skin. He was the color of a sunflower. He was so yellow, with sunken eyes. Very disturbing. I was outside work one day having a smoke when I heard something that sounded like a car crash, so I walked around the corner to check it out. Turns out a woman had hit an elderly man on a motor scooter who was crossing at a crosswalk with his elderly wife, also on a scooter. Sent him flying about 20 feet and his head was split open like a watermelon, blood everywhere. He was obviously dead. Woman gets out of her car, sees what she's done and immediately vomits everywhere and collapses. A horrible screaming that I won't forget from the man's wife while she just sits in the middle of the street on her scooter. That was some fricked up crap. Pay attention when you're driving, kids. You are responsible for about 4,000 pounds of steel when you're behind that wheel. I'm a paramedic and have been for about 10 years now, and I've seen a lot of disturbing things, but one thing sticks out to me more than the rest. When I was still new, I went on a call for flu-like symptoms and the elderly lady literally had just fever, body aches and a cough with no other complaints, so we are all thinking she might actually have the flu. She wanted to go to the hospital, so we got her on the cot, and the design of her ground floor apartment with all her furniture made it impossible to turn the cot around, so we had to wheel her out backwards with me at her feet and staring at her face. We just get out the door when she lets out this horrible gurgle scream, turns grey and slumped over. My partner and another firefighter were next to her head and confirmed she had no pulse. We are close to the truck, so we load her up while I start CPR. As I start pumping her chest, she goes from this blank stare of the dead to looking right at me with this confused look on her face and started moving her arms trying to get me to stop. So I do. Instantly she was back to dead again, complete with blank stare and no movement. This time the three of us all confirmed no pulse, and so I continue CPR and she starts looking up at me again with that same confused look and moving her arms around again. Now I'm thinking this has got to be a mistake. She can't be dead and moving while I do CPR. Can she? I stop. Check. Still dead with no pulse. Resume CPR and yes, again she was looking up right at my eyes, moving again, so weirded out as I was. I just started talking to her to try to let her know why I was doing CPR on her as my partner got the cardiac monitor defibrillator pad stuck on her. When I stopped for the rhythm check, she was in ventricular fibrillation. A single shock and we got a slow pulse back. Started the cardiac monitor's pacing function, and while she never regained consciousness, we got her to the hospital alive. Found out later she ultimately died at the hospital, but I'll never forget that look on her face while we made eye contact while I did CPR on her. I had no idea that could happen, but the doctor in the ER told me that if CPR is started quickly enough and the compressions are deep enough, you actually can remain somewhat conscious during it even if your heart is otherwise not beating. It has happened to me a handful of times since then, and so I always talk to my dead patients now while we are doing CPR, just in case. That's how you know you are doing high quality CPR. Walking with a friend on the sidewalk of a crowded street in the city I was living in a few weeks ago, there was a loud, terrible noise that made us both spin around, and I witnessed someone being launched into the air after being hit by a car and their body being mangled on the ground after impact. I rushed over and the person was obviously dead, eyes wide open, blood trickling out of mouth. I'm not deeply scarred by it since I've come to accept it happens every day, but I do think about it often. The only person who knows about it besides me is the person I was with and my closest friends. Would rather keep it in the past. Taking my mom off life support was the most disturbing. My mom was still fairly young, She was very brain damaged and permanently unconscious. Best case scenario, if she miraculously regained consciousness, was essentially being like a baby. Witnessing her death was overwhelming. She gasped for a while before they upped her morphine. Her tongue was cracked and yellow. It sounded like she was snoring for some time. I sat there and just prayed she'd hurry up and die. There was nothing else to be done. And in your head, you're thinking, but she's young. WTF is this? We seriously can't do anything else but this? I don't know if many people know this other than those who have been there, but when they finally breathe their last, there's just a surge of peace and calm. This horrible thing I'd dreaded for days had finally happened. It wasn't in front of me to taunt me anymore. So many hundreds of thousands go through that every year in the US alone, though. Hurts to think that so many other people have felt that pain. A little boy went missing at a beach pond we were at when I was a kid. I was about 10. He was younger than me by a couple years. I'm thinking he was about 7. We had seen the mom go from nervous anxiety to all-out hysterics walking around on the sand. Then they announced a beach-wide search. All of the adults linked arms and walked out into the water searching. Everyone held their breath waiting. My dad came walking forward with this little boy laying in his arms, mouth so blue. He had found him literally submerged under the murky water and deep mud out away from the shore. His mother was screaming and pounding on his father's chest. The little boy had tried to swim to catch up to a little boat the dad had gone off in and he drowned. I remember thinking he was alive, despite the blue lips. I think he did spit up mud when they laid him out for CPR, but I doubt he was alive. Watching my dad walk out with him in his arms is something I'll never forget. We went to the funeral. The mother was inconsolable. You could tell that her and the husband were never going to get through this together. She clearly blamed him for the loss of their child. Dang man, don't envy your dad at all. What a nightmare. Was riding the subway and saw a guy dressed as a clown talking to a 20-something hipster girl across the aisle from him. This wasn't a fun circus type clown outfit. Think sleazy greaser paint over day-old stubble, stained clothing type clown. Anyway, the girl seemed to be tolerating the conversation, not actively engaged in it. When she finally got up and got off the train, the clown stood up and went across the aisle, pressed his face against his seat and sniffed it loudly, then looked up at the rest of us with an unabashed grin on his face. Jared Leto and his crazy method acting. Dude, this just happened to me a week ago. We went to Applebee's, yeah those are still a thing, last week with our family. We have a big family, so it was like 13-14 people and I have a lot of younger cousins. Anyways, it's hectic because there are a lot of kids and one of the kids asks to go to the bathroom. She's around 6-7 years old and as I said things were hectic so she went by herself. Didn't really think much of it. I go to the bathroom about 2 minutes later and in the front lobby, but kinda to the side where you can't see them, I see an elderly man talking to my little cousin, smiling at her and making her laugh. At first I thought it was another family member coming in to say hi to her, but it was not. He was a charming guy, I could tell. Well, at least to children. And anyways, I see him take her hand and make way towards the door. I immediately go up to the guy and said, Pooja, Indian name, I'm Indian. Do you know this man? The guy instantly froze and his face turned white. She said she just met him and the guy immediately gave some really weird and vague answer that he was taking her out to take her to her parents. The guy was rattled. I knew immediately he was trying to kidnap her, and he knew that I knew. He immediately just left the Applebee's. It's not that creepy, and I'm not very good at writing or explaining things, but what scared me was just how casual and charming the guy was to the girl. Like he had no remorse and you can tell he knew exactly what he was doing. What is even more frightening is this is a nice place in town and my little cousin was just unattended for 2 minutes. I don't have kids and I would get mad at my parents when they were overprotective, but I completely understand why they did that. It's only been a week or so since, but ever since then I randomly will think about that man and how different my cousin's life could have been. So creepy how it can just happen so easily. The most disturbing was probably picking out what I wanted to be buried in when I was 21. I was about to have surgery and the neurologist told my parents there was a good chance I wouldn't make it. I still think about it sometimes and I'm 44 now. I was pooping in a restroom in the back of a food court in the bottom of a large tower. a 60+ story tower in Houston. It was a pretty small bathroom and kinda out of the way, which is why I was there to do my business. Well, I'm just starting to wrap things up, and in walks a young man who proceeded to the urinal and does his thing. I only catch a quick glimpse of him through the crack in the stall. He seems to be in his mid to late 20s. When he is washing his hands, his phone rings and he starts talking, oblivious to my presence. I can hear a tinny female voice on the other end. I tuck my feet up and listen. At first he doesn't know who this girl is, but he quickly figures out that she's a girl he hooked up with on a recent business trip. He's going to be back there soon. Maybe they can hang out, he asks. Maybe, she says. But she has news. She's pregnant and she wants to get an abortion. She wants him to pay for it. He agrees. He asks her if there is anything else he can do. Should he go with her to get it done? No, she doesn't want that. She doesn't really want to see him again. He was calm, supportive of her decision. They ended the conversation almost gently, as if afraid of hurting each other further. After he hung up, it was dead silent for about 15 seconds, and then he broke down. I stayed very still. I did not want to see this intimately into his life. I had only wanted to preserve a sense of privacy, but at this point I was committed. He cursed and cried for about 5 minutes, then gave himself a little pep talk in the mirror. This was, I learned, not the first time he had been in this situation. I waited a couple minutes before I left the bathroom. As I was walking back through the food court, I saw him sitting at a table with various professional looking business people, all smiling and convivial. All evidence of the storm he just weathered gone from his face. This is a good answer. Was on a trail ride with a woman and her horse. Her horse was really old but was her best friend. All was good until we get in the middle of nowhere and all of a sudden her horse has a heart attack. When a horse has a heart attack they rear straight up and he fell over on top of her. We were in Western saddles. The saddle horn went right through her sternum and killed her. We rolled the dead horse off of her and all we could hear was the rush of air leaving her, or entering. I have no idea. She just made a strange gurgling noise that sounded like an old coffee maker. Lived in the downtown area of my city for 3 years with my husband. One night after closing down our favorite bar, we decided to walk down the street and get a couple slices of pizza. On the way there we see a girl who is so messed up she literally cannot walk. Like literally seems like she is falling down drunk trying to walk down the street. Her head is rolling from side to side as she is walking. Just picture a 110-pound ragdoll trying to stand. Then we realize that she is digging in her bag like she's looking for keys. So I stop her and ask if she is okay, and she just keeps going. I have to get away. I have to get away. That's when we notice the trail of blood on the sidewalk behind her. Her neck is bright red like she had been choked, and her lip is swollen. We call 911. She finally takes a deep breath and says she thinks she was drugged, but no, she was raped. Before we can even get her calmed down enough to tell us her name, a guy with a big scratch on his face and blood on his shirt comes walking up and starts saying she is his wife, and he needs to get her home. My husband stepped in and says, no, I think we will find out where she needs to go from her. The guy tries to swing at my husband, who knocks him on his butt. My husband pins him down. Then the girl starts seizing. So then we were on the sidewalk. My husband has the rapist pinned to the ground. I've got the girl's head in my lap hoping she doesn't die while we wait for the ambulance to get there. What I always found the most disturbing wasn't the evil that drove that man to rape that woman. It was that 10 people gathered around us in the course of the exchange. Not one offered to help, but one did take a video. I used to be an EMT and we got a call for a multiple car collision. We get on scene and there are a few injuries among the car drivers but nothing too serious. Going through each person, I noticed a man kneeling on the ground facing away from me. I ran up and asked if he was hurt and noticed he was holding his son. Apparently one of the cars hit and killed the kid while the dad and son were walking. I put my hand on his shoulder. The dad was so grief-stricken he was not breathing, and when he finally took a breath, he screamed like something I've never heard before. That still haunts me. No one should have to see their child die. I saw someone have a seizure in my freshman high school business class during the first week of school. It started as a fight but the other guy swung a keyboard. This was in a computer lab, and knocked him into the edge of the desk, sending him spasming. The guy got tangled in the wires somehow and dragged the entire setup, as well as his neighbors, with him. So this guy is now partially suspended in the air having a seizure while our pregnant teacher runs to get the teacher next door who is certified to handle stuff like this. Everyone just stood up and looked over while this happened because no one had ever been in this situation. The girl sitting next to the guy was screaming and trying to help but didn't do much. The teacher comes in and gets to work untangling him and setting him down. I'll never forget those hollow eyes with a blank stare as his body convulsed. The guy who hit him with the keyboard also stole money out of his wallet at some point too. Disturbing for me. I saw an old lady walking down the street screaming stuff like, "Mom, I want my mom. Where's my mom? I can't do it anymore, I can't," almost crying. She seemed so disturbed, so out of her mind. This is going to sound lame but it's my answer. I'm sitting on the couch alone at night watching TV. Lights are off, and I've got my cat in my lap. Suddenly something startles my cat and he sits bolt upright, facing me, looking directly over my shoulder. His eyes go like saucers and the sucker starts slow growling. Never heard him growl before. He was frozen, staring, didn't move. I've got nothing behind me that I know of but a brick wall with maybe a half-meter gap between the couch and that wall. So I'm frozen in place watching my cat who is frozen in place watching something behind me, and he is watching it intently. At this point there's no doubt in my mind from his reaction that there's someone behind me. He's only scared of one thing: strangers. Now if it was a bug or a moth his gaze would be darting and he'd have some playfulness about him. Nope, not in this instance. He was locked onto something that truly scared him. He was a statue. Fight or flight mode. Eventually I get the balls up to slowly turn around. Nothing. I look behind the couch and the gap. Nothing. My cat settles and goes back to sleep. Either a freaking ghost was in the room with me that night or my cat is in butthole. Scared the living crap out of me though. Like sheer, creeping fear as I genuinely thought someone had snuck up behind me. I was at a movie alone, and I came out to get some soda and there was a guy waiting outside the theater just looking off. I came out 45 minutes later to pee and the guy was in the movie theater just standing around in the lobby. There was something totally out of place about him. Dressed normal for the area, but he was looking around nervously and trying to avoid any sort of eye contact. So I'll look at the movie times and there are like 3 kids movies getting out in a half hour. I ask him, "Are you waiting for your kids to get out of a movie?" and he freaking booked it out the door. It was a theater in a mostly empty strip mall and it was like 40 degrees Fahrenheit out, so he probably wasn't out for a stroll. I don't know if he was just a weirdo or if he had actual nefarious intentions, but it stuck with me. This isn't the most disturbing thing I've seen, but it's one of the creepier memories I have. Was totally expecting a shooting. Good on you for saying something. I worked for an assisted living company for about 6 years. During that time I experienced my fair share of death. Some went peacefully, some went smiling, some went crying, some went with family, others with just the staff around them. One lady went with something else entirely. I was helping out the nursing staff with resident wake-ups because someone had called off. One particular resident whom I was assigned to, we'll call her Catherine, was a heck of a woman. Loud, sassy, hilarious, and kind. She was very well put together and relatively fit for her age. This morning, however, I noticed that something was off. Long story made very short, within an hour she was virtually unconscious with severe heart failure. As we were already short-staffed, none of the nurses or aides could sit with her while she spent her final hours in bed. So I decided that I would stay and sit with her until family arrived. About 3 hours I sat with Catherine. She mostly slept. Occasionally she would mumble something or squeeze my hand, but mostly she slept with very slow, labored breaths. A nurse came in to let me know that Catherine's son was just about 20 minutes from the building, and that I could go home if I wanted to. What was 20 more minutes, though? I didn't want to leave. I'm sitting there with her peacefully, knowing that she was likely less than an hour from death. I remember very specifically looking at the clock to see how much longer until her son was to arrive, and the moment that I looked away Catherine shot straight up, stared around where the wall and ceiling met, and let out a blood-curdling scream. This woman could hardly breathe and hadn't moved a muscle in an hour. There is absolutely no explanation for her sudden strength. Nor do I have an explanation for the pure terror in her eyes. Catherine used her last breath with that scream. She fell back, white as paper, and was gone. The nurses rushed in to ask what happened. I barely got it out before I excused myself to the bathroom, and I just sat there and shook for an hour. I've never been more terrified in my life. Catherine's son showed up about 5 minutes after. The nurses told him that she went peacefully and with people by her side. But she didn't go peacefully, and I left her the second she passed. I have never been a believer in an afterlife, but this experience rattled me to my core. I've submitted this before, but it's the most disturbing thing that's happened to me. I'm female, and was about 20 at the time. I lived in a basement apartment with a roommate. One night I couldn't sleep. It was about 4 in the morning. I usually got up at 5 AM to get ready for work, so I called in sick. I worked for my dad and could get away with that, and just sat in my room on the internet in the dark. I then got a big whiff of cigarette smoke. My roommate at the time and I did not smoke, but every once in a while in the mornings while getting ready I would smell cigarette smoke faintly. I was often in a hurry and shrugged it off to just being lingering smells on my clothes from visiting smoking friends. At this time it was very strong smelling. I decided to investigate. The smell clearly was coming from my room. I decided to get a second opinion from my roommate who stays up until morning gaming. He smelled it too and thought it originated from my slightly ajar window. He pulled back the blinds to go in for a better sniff. A silhouette outside, lit from behind by a street light, shifted away quickly. My roommate grabbed a bat and headed outside. He found nothing. I had crappy plastic broken blinds with horizontal slits, so we placed a towel over them and covered every other window in the apartment. This same event played out a couple more mornings at about weekly intervals while getting ready for work at about 5 AM. After returning from my shower to my room, I would smell smoke, lose my cool, look out the window, and get my roommate, who would go outside too late to see anyone. We devised a plan to next time not check the window. I was to go to my roommate calmly and he would sneak out with his bat to catch the silhouette. Another morning arrived carrying the scent of smoke. The plan worked. He caught a man with a big hood that shielded his face from view. The man made a feeble excuse about a cat and ran off. When it got lighter out, I went outside to look at my window. The grass was all worn, like someone had been sitting there quite often for quite some time. There were also cigarette butts everywhere. The cops were notified and kept an eye on the area, but the silhouette never returned. That I knew of, at least. The moral is always bring your clothes to the bathroom with you when you shower. It pains me to think of all the times he must have seen me drop my towel. Once in eastern Afghanistan, we were visiting a small village for some intel when the elders kept warning us not to talk to the family in a certain house. Of course we head over there assuming he was an opposition fighter or bomb maker or something. A little boy greeted us with a scared look on his face. He invited us in while he ran to get his dad. Some of us went inside. A few posted up for security reasons. The guy comes in nervous AF. The interpreter knows something is super weird with the guy and that he's avoiding questions. We also notice there are a few boys peeping around the corner and no sign of any females. The whole thing was weird and very offsetting to the point that we didn't want to find out WTF was going on. Later on, we head back into the village because there's some sort of unrest and the elders keep requesting we help out. The problem was with the man who lived at that house. The interpreter said he was harboring a dead body. We go to dude's house. He doesn't respond, but one of the boys leads us in and points to the back room. Long story short, the guy was pimping out little boys to other towns. One of the boys had ran away. When the man found the boy, his mother tried to intervene. He brutally beat her, took her back to his house and killed her. He was then forcing the boy to watch and act sex acts with his dead mother. The reason why the village was fighting was because most of them wanted to kill him then and there, but the desecration was so bad that the surviving boy went mute. Some villagers wanted to find the father before they did anything so he could witness and possibly perform the execution. A lot of the villagers wanted to all out go to war with the tribe that the man was from. It's important to note that they all knew he was pimping out the T-boys and never said a peep. It was when he harbored a dead body and had sex with another married man's wife that the issues came. Frick that place. I can sum up all of my recurring nightmares to one similar night in Iraq, except mine was finding the body of a dead girl in the trunk of a car. and a super creepy dude trying to convince me that she was just sleeping. Like you said, frick that place. Last year, my sister was shot in the head. She survived, but they had to take her eyes out from the bullet just destroying them, and was in a drug-induced coma for probably a week. She couldn't breathe on her own, so they had to give her a tracheotomy. Well, with that comes having to change the tubes to put in sterile new ones. I remember telling myself not to look, so I watched. It was only a 5-second process, but when they pulled that tube out, her body went into complete panic. The way her body was trying so hard to get air was horrible to see. She is good now and adapting to being blind, but man, that crap fricked me up. This happened when I was 22ish. I was driving over a mountain pass, going around a corner, when I saw a mob of crows on the body of a deer that had been hit by a truck. As my vehicle approached, some of the birds flew off the body, and the deer attempted to stand up. These crows were eating the deer alive, after he had been injured by the impact of the semi-truck. Well, if that's not a metaphor for life, I don't know what is. I was driving home from work at 2 AM and I saw a drunk guy falling on road. I was driving past, so of course I did a U-turn to check up on him. As I was doing that, a car came out of the side of the road and drove right on top of him. The only thing you could see was his head. The driver didn't understand what happened, got out to have a look and realized he drove over a man. I stopped immediately and started calling 999 as I rushed to the scene. The guy seemed unconscious. The driver was in shock, nearly crying. Another driver stopped to help, so I carried on talking to the ambulance. By the time I finished the conversation, they have managed to get him out. He then woke up, looked at us, obviously very drunk, lifted up his shirt. He saw bruises and scratches, told everyone to go home and left. We're out. It's because he was so pickled he didn't brace for impact. Years ago, one of my cats at the age of 6 got hit by a car. He was quite deaf. My neighbor witnessed it and said cat didn't see it coming at all. The impact broke his hip in 2 places. He had a long convalescence, but he lived to age 19. R.I.P. Larry, I love you. Spring break on a beach in Florida with some friends. Just sitting in the sun chatting. There was a family nearby with 2 boys who were digging a tunnel in the sand that led to a little sand burrow type space. They would crawl in and out of it, and both could fit down there at the same time. It didn't occur to anyone that this sand burrow might not be that stable. All of a sudden we hear the mother screaming and look up to see her ripping away at the sand. People came running and started digging with her. The tunnel burrow had caved in on the 2 kids. It was horrible because you couldn't really tell where the boys were in order to get them out. It was all just blind digging in the sand trying to find them before they ran out of air. I don't remember how long it took because the situation was so terrible, but eventually both were found and dragged out of the sand. They were both okay, minus the memory of being buried alive. That reminds me of the story of the kid who got caught in the sinkhole at the Indiana Dunes. He made it out okay too, but frick, that is absolutely terrifying to think about and probably my greatest fear. Most disturbing thing was probably when I had to do first aid on a lady. She rolled her car into the ditch on the highway, and by the time I got there, she was already out of the car and the car was fully engulfed in flames. I pulled over and ran over to go help because she was covered in blood. All that was on the ground around everything were children's toys from her car that got ejected through the windows when she rolled her car. Nobody was able to check the car for kids because of fire and small explosions. I figured there was a kid dead for sure. In the news the next day it said she was a lone occupant in the car. But after she was taken to the hospital I couldn't sleep, eat, or even put a sentence together. Also was shaking non-stop. I used to ride a commuter train to and from work. One evening, the train stopped unexpectedly. I looked out the window to see a teenage boy screaming and crying. He kept grabbing at his shirt, to the point of almost tearing it in 2 from the collar down. Once it was determined no one on board was hurt, they had everyone exit. The train had hit the boy's friend and killed him. They were 16 years old. All I saw of the friend was a shoe flung far from the accident. I learned that the friend had borrowed his sister's bike and it got stuck on the tracks. He tried to free it and didn't get out of the way in time. I can still see that boy in traumatized agony whenever I think about it, and this happened about 10 years ago. I saw a train hit a woman. I was on it. When we were finally allowed to exit, the police officer at our door said to us, "Do not look behind me," as we were exiting. Of course, we looked. This involves a kitten, so do not scroll down if you can't handle it. I worked at an animal hospital for many years. I started when I was 16. I had been there for maybe a year when in walks my friend. He is unmistakable and I'm pretty surprised to see him. He holds up a paper plate and only says some woman was spraying this with bug spray. What was presented to me was a kitten that had clearly been run over. One eye was the size of a grape, hanging out of its head and milky white. Its abdomen was crushed and open, revealing intestines and stomach. Its front leg hung over the plate with what must have been every single bone broken because it hung like spaghetti. I put on my empathy face and said, "You did the right thing bringing it here, but there isn't anything more we can do other than cremate the poor thing since it's already dead." Friend: "No, it's not." On cue, this kitten lifts its head 1 stroke 2 inch up and lets out a guttural, choking mew. I ran to the treatment room, right next to the vet who were in there, and yelled, "OMG, OMG, guys, this is still alive. Euthanasia right in the heart. Poor things." There was nothing we could do other than end its misery. I saw terrible things there: abuse, neglect, frostbite, burns, gunshots. But this happened when I was still green, so it's seared into my memory. Zombie kitten is something I will never forget a detail of. I can see why that stuck with you. Animals can suffer the most horrible injuries and still live. I live in the countryside and badgers getting hit by cars is quite common. Basically, you hit a badger at speed and it will demolish the front end of your car, but the badger doesn't always get killed instantly. It's horrible listening to them crying in pain. Lived kinda out in the boonies on a farm. It was called Buzzard Creek Farm. Anyway, we had a couple of dogs and a couple of cats. One day, upon waking up in the morning and going outside, I found one of our cats had been killed. Here's the weird part: its head, 4 paws and tail were present, but there was no body. Preface: I was a volunteer firefighter for about 6 years. Driving to a job once, cable guy, and I came across an auto accident. Honda sedan went off the road, down a small embankment, struck a tree and spun around. The occupants: one was out of the vehicle and alert. The driver and other passenger were inside, unconscious, kind of splayed out on the seats. Seatbelts off. I approach the scene. Some people are tending to the conscious guy, trying to get him to sit down. A few others are peering into the car at the unconscious guys, unsure what to do. I reach into the vehicle and check both their pulses. Strong, and they are breathing steadily, but they've been tossed around the cabin pretty well. So my first instinct is to leave them be for fear of spinal injury. As long as they keep breathing, they've got a good chance till the EMTs arrive. I sort of say this out loud to the other people there, and then stay close to keep an eye. So I'm sort of standing beside the car, trying to keep between these two guys and a growing crowd of people around me. Cars are pulling up and people keep getting out to try and help. One couple approaches and the woman begins flipping out. The man with her starts holding her to calm her down, and I turn around and go, "Can I just have everyone move back a little bit?" in an attempt to thin the crowd. While turned around, I notice the guy holding this hysterical woman is holding up his phone with the other hand, taking a freaking video of the two guys in the car. I look him dead in the face and go, "Are you freaking serious, dude? Get that out of here." To which he becomes irate and yells at me, "Hey, frick you, man. That's my cousin right there," pointing at one of the guys in the car. Without thinking, mind in a million places, I respond, "Whoa, relax, I didn't know." I turn back to the guys in the car, keeping an eye on their breathing. In a few minutes the EMTs arrive, and I clear out. I'm 5 minutes back on the road when I finally realize the absurdity of what just happened. The conscious dude must have called his family. Family came. That was the hysterical woman and video dude. And this guy's first instinct when he arrives to find his cousin lying unconscious in a car wreck is to freaking take a video. What the actual frick? If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.